Hello everybody. Today we are going to start our next unit, moving on to our next phylum, Annelids, or segmented worms. These are called segmented worms because you can see all the little ridges within the worm. Annelids include organisms like earthworms, marine worms like this worm right here, and leeches. Annelida means little rings. What that means is that the body is arranged into segments, so little repeating units that are separated by a structure called the septum, which is an internal wall. So if we were to cut an earthworm in half, we could see these little ridges. And then we can see here like a wall. That would be the septum. And the digestive tract flows through that, and the blood vessels flow through that. But there's an actual wall separating one segment from another inside. The benefits of segmentation are that, one, the organism gets more efficient movement. Instead of contracting the whole body, the organism can control which segments move. And so that can lead to much more efficient movement. Also very powerful movements, especially with worms that do a lot of digging and a lot of burrowing. We need that extra muscle power. And then segments can be modified for different functions. This allows for an organism to perform increasingly complex activities, so each segment can be specialized in a sense. Some annelids have bristles called setae on the segments, and this is to help with movement. So in an earthworm, they're nearly invisible. You can feel them if you touch the worm. Very small setae hairs. Typically marine worms, their setae are much more prominent. You can see here in this marine worm. Annelids have a true coelom, so unlike roundworms that had a pseudocoelom, they have a body cavity that is completely lined with mesoderm. Remember that a coelom protects internal organs, gives more flexibility and movement, and allows the internal organs to move and grow independently of the outer layer of the body wall. So lots of benefits to a coelom. These images here illustrate the coelom, I think, pretty clearly. We have the outer surface of the body wall here, and you can see that there's an actual gap in between the body wall and the blood vessel here that runs along the back of the worm. So that's what I mean by the coelom, the body cavity. It's hollow in here. And you can see it also on this side too. You can see that the body wall, the skin, is not attached to the digestive system. There's a physical gap in between. So digestion and excretion. Like roundworms, annelids have a digestive tract with two openings. So they have a mouth on one end and an anus on the other. They also have intestines. And they have some other structures called the crop and the gizzard, which we're going to talk about when we do our earthworm dissection. But they have a complete digestive system. For excretion, the worms have organs called nephridia that filter waste and excrete them through the skin. Nephridia go right along the outer edge of the worm, right against the skin, and there are these small pores that will release those wastes. What organ is similar to the nephridia in worms, do you think? What human organ is similar to this? In terms of circulation, worms have a closed circulatory system. It means that they have a heart and blood vessels, and blood is always contained within a network of those blood vessels. So a closed circulatory system looks something like this. We have a heart that pumps blood through arteries, and then blood is maintained in capillaries, and it returns back to the heart through veins. With open circulatory systems, you have a heart and arteries that pump blood through the heart, but the cells in the body just sort of soak in that blood, and then it gets pumped back in these tubes later on. So earthworms, they have hearts and blood vessels. The heart of the worm are called aortic arches. These are them right here. And then they have two major blood vessels. They have the dorsal blood vessel that goes along the back, and a ventral one that goes along the front. And they do have smaller blood vessels that branch off those main ones throughout the body of the worm. If you look at an earthworm along the back, you can actually see that dorsal blood vessel. It's this dark line that goes right down the middle of the worm. Next, we have respiration. Some annelids, like this feather duster annelid, have gills that help them breathe. Earthworms will breathe through their skin. Next, we have response. In annelids, we start to see the development of more complex nervous systems. Earthworms have brains, very tiny brains located at the head end. And they also have a major nerve cord that runs from the brain all the way down to the posterior end of the worm, called the ventral nerve cord, so right along the belly. Many marine annelids also have extra adaptations and appendages for detecting sensory stimuli. For example, the feather duster worms here, these appendages, they help with breathing, they help gather food, and they also detect light. So these appendages here help increase the worm's senses. Annelids reproduce sexually. Some are hermaphroditic, meaning that they produce both eggs and sperm, so they have male and female parts. Earthworms have a band of thickened segments called the clitellum, which will release eggs and sperm. So when earthworms meet, they'll line up their clitella and exchange eggs and sperm. This is an example of how these segments are specialized. The clitellum is a group of these thickened segments within the whole worm that are specialized for producing eggs and sperm. So we see that specialization in segmentation. Finally, there are 3 different major classes of annelids, and they are classified by how they move. Earthworms are part of the class Oligochaeta. They have very few setae, very thin setae, and they live in the soil. Leeches are in the class Hirudinea, and they have suckers and feed on blood. They're parasitic. They're able to swim. And then marine worms, or polychaetes, they have really thick setae. They almost look like centipedes, and they live in the ocean.